Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. When we find ourselves in a difficult conversation, or when we're anticipating one, the first task is usually to manage our own emotions and reactions. The best approach, therefore, is to be proactive. Approach coping empowers us to manage our own thoughts, behaviours and emotions, and thereby take care of our own needs. It then allows us to better manage the needs of the other person and the conversation generally. In the spirit of approach coping, the remainder of this talk will present a range of cognitive, behavioural and emotion-focused strategies to better manage ourselves within difficult conversations. And the key to self-management is clarity of awareness. What is actually happening in this situation? What states am I and the other person in? What's the dynamic of the conversation? And what would be better states and better dynamics? If we can objectively identify and accept the difficult situation, the resulting equanimity in us will open up access to our prefrontal cortex, which will help us make wise choices in how to orient ourselves. Once we've accessed the more rational part of our brain, we can choose a wiser approach and a wiser goal for the conversation, shifting our behaviours and our state to serve that wise goal. Even if we cannot change the other person, after all, we can only influence and invite others to change. We can always shift our own feelings and thereby experience less negative impact from the difficult conversation. It can be really helpful to frame the conversation in terms of Judith Klass's conversational intelligence dashboard. Am I feeling defensive or aggressive? Am I in a wait and see mode? And is the other person in these states? Can I shift my state and therefore the purpose of the conversation? Can I increase the dynamic of trust and therefore move to a more we-centric win-win orientation? This framework gives us an excellent structure in which to practice emotional intelligence. If we can identify the signs of distrust before our amygdala is triggered, we can activate the higher level brain functions in the executive brain where empathy, judgment, and our more strategic social skills can predominate. So that's emotional intelligence in action. For example, we might notice the very early signs of threat or anger and deliberately quieten ourselves, take a deep breath, and recognise that our reaction is a normal response from our threat system trying to keep us safe. By now, we can assess where we are in the dynamic and where we should be for more constructive outcomes. We can deliberately adopt a more open, discovery-oriented mode. We can ask more open questions to which we don't have the answers. We can share how we're feeling, and most importantly, we can listen really deeply. Sometimes before you can address the situation itself, you need to shift your own state. Assessing the situation sometimes works in and of itself because it shifts us out of the fight-flight state towards a more rational, objective mode. Other times you might need to pause, take a few slow breaths, and then breathe out slowly. If possible, you might literally take a break or go for a walk. Or you might self-compassionately thank your threat system for trying to take care of you, and you'll proceed to assess things carefully and intelligently. Or, live in the actual interaction, if you're feeling threat or fear, you might just directly sense your feet on the ground or your body in the chair. Or, if you have time to prepare, you might meditate, get a massage or exercise, etc., etc., all to shake the stress out of your system and regain some clarity of mind. Changing state like this makes it easier to access our prefrontal cortex for problem solving and it also automatically calms our emotional system. Now, very often our framing of the situation causes us more stress and anxiety than the situation actually warrants. A useful technique to shift into a more constructive orientation is the two conditions test. So, when you notice your negative emotions, quickly turn your attention to your thinking and ask, is it realistic? So often, we uncritically accept our thoughts as true, even when they're exaggerated or distorted. This reflects what's known as emotional reasoning, which is the tendency to think our beliefs are true when we have strong emotions attached to them. So, if our thinking is in fact exaggerated, catastrophizing, or black and white thinking, or overgeneralizing, we ought to edit our thoughts to make them more realistic. This usually reduces anxiety and re-engages our prefrontal brain. Now, even if our thinking is realistic, the person may indeed be aggressive or insulting. Does focusing on that really assist things? So the second condition to be met is the question, is my thinking helpful? Do you want to hand the keys of your emotional kingdom to someone who's behaving in ignorance or with bad intent? So even if your thinking is realistic, say the person is being aggressive, rather than reacting personally, it might be more helpful to attend to the person's needs and commit to a more collaborative possibility. In a majority of situations, people don't intend to be upset or difficult. They're stuck in their own fears or anxieties. One way of navigating one's own upset within difficult conversations is to identify what type of difficult conversation am I engaged in. Is it a what happened disagreement? Is it an overly emotional exchange? Or is one's identity feeling threatened? Each type respond positively to different strategies to turn them all into learning conversations. For example, in the what happened conversation, rather than focusing on why you're right and, of course, why they're wrong, you can generate curiosity within yourself. You might ask, I wonder why we see things differently. Or with a conversation that's emotionally overcharged, one can reframe feelings as informative and be curious as to what they're all about. Using self-compassion and problem solving, we can ask, why am I feeling so strongly? Is there something important at stake here? This again moves us into a more rational, reflective mode. Or where my identity feels threatened, I can recognise that my identity is complex. It's not black and white, and I can use this conversation to build a more robust, more nuanced sense of self. I can ask, how do others experience me? What can I learn here? So in summary, the first step in managing difficult conversations well is managing ourselves well. If we can step outside our reaction and understand the dynamics playing out, if we can shift to a more realistic and more helpful purpose, and if we can reframe the situation and redirect it to more collaborative and positive purpose, we have come a long way indeed. In the next talk, we'll examine how we use this conversational intelligence to then encourage the other person to be more constructive. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you'd like to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. And if you like the podcast, share it with people you like so they can like it too.